I knew something was different about the bleeding man I pulled from the river the moment he opened his eyes. He didn't look grateful or relieved like most people would after nearly drowning. Instead, he looked terrified not of dying, but of being found. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I thought saving his life was just another emergency call on a stormy night in Cedar Valley. I had no idea that the unconscious stranger I dragged from the flooding would turn out to be Michael Harrison, one of the richest men in America, running from corporate assassins who wanted him dead. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm about to tell you how one rescue changed both our lives forever, and why sometimes the people who need saving the most are the ones with everything to lose. Quick, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and whether you've ever helped a complete stranger. Now, if you've ever wondered what it would be like to save someone's life and fall in love in the process, smash that subscribe button because this story is about finding love when you least expect it. Hit that like button if you believe good deeds always come back around. Let's dive into this incredible journey. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a 28-year-old veterinarian who spent the last 6 months trying to keep my small-town clinic from going under after my mentor's death left me drowning in debt and overwhelmed by responsibilities I never thought I'd face alone. Cedar Valley was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where farmers still paid their vet bills with fresh eggs and homemade pie, and where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in a tree for the 3rd time that month. I'd inherited the practice from Dr. Williams, who'd been like a father to me, but keeping it running was harder than I'd ever imagined. The night everything changed started like any other emergency call. The storm had been building all evening, turning our quiet valley into something that looked more like a disaster movie. Thunder rolled across the hills like cannon fire, and rain came down so hard it sounded like machine gun fire on the clinic roof. I was finishing up paperwork around midnight when my emergency phone rang. Probably another horse with colic or a dog that had gotten into something it shouldn't have. But when I answered, all I could hear was the sound of rushing water and what might have been someone screaming. I shouted into the phone, "Hello? Hello," but the line went dead. Something about that call made my stomach twist. I grabbed my emergency kit and headed out into the storm, following the main road toward the sound of the Clearwater River, which had been rising all day. What I found when I got there made my blood run cold. The old wooden bridge that connected our side of town to the highway was completely gone, swept away like it was made of matchsticks. And there, caught against the massive oak tree that had stood by that bridge for over 100 years, was a car. Or what was left of one. The vehicle was upside down, half submerged, with someone trapped inside. I didn't think. I just moved. The water was deeper than it looked and cold enough to steal my breath, but I managed to reach the wreckage. Through the shattered windshield, I could see a man, unconscious, blood streaming from a deep gash on his forehead. He was maybe in his mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of strong features that would have been handsome if they weren't deathly pale. Getting him out of that car and back to solid ground was the hardest thing I'd ever done. He was dead weight, probably 6'2", and built like someone who actually used those expensive gym memberships rich people bought. By the time I had him loaded into my truck, I was exhausted, soaked through, and shaking from adrenaline. The nearest hospital was 40 minutes away on a good day. With half the roads flooded and debris everywhere, it might as well have been on the moon. But my clinic was only 10 minutes away, and I had everything I needed to stabilize someone who was bleeding out. I'd performed emergency surgery on plenty of animals over the years, but working on a human being was completely different territory. Still, anatomy was anatomy, and I'd taken enough courses in college to know what I was looking at. The head wound was the worst part, glass fragments embedded deep enough to require careful extraction. I cleaned and sutured as precisely as I could while he remained unconscious. His breathing was steady, no obvious signs of internal bleeding, but that bump on the back of his skull worried me. Definite concussion, possibly worse. I set up a recovery area in my office using every blanket I could find and the portable heater I kept for animals suffering from hypothermia. Then I settled in to wait, drinking cold coffee and wondering who this stranger was and how he'd ended up driving through the worst storm Cedar Valley had seen in 20 years. He woke up 6 hours later, his eyes fluttering open with the kind of confusion that comes with serious head trauma, before slowly focusing on my face. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, but there was something educated about his accent. Definitely not local. "Where am I?" I set down my coffee mug and leaned forward. Cedar Valley Veterinary Clinic. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I pulled you from your car during the flooding. He tried to sit up, winced hard, and settled back down onto the makeshift bed. My car? Totaled. You went through the windshield when you hit the tree. Do you remember what happened? His hand went automatically to the bandages covering his forehead. I remember driving. Heavy rain. Then everything goes black. What's your name? The pause that followed was so long I started to think he'd lost consciousness again. When he finally spoke, there was something almost reluctant about it. Michael. Michael what? Another long pause stretched between us. I'm not entirely sure. Everything feels foggy right now. I studied his face carefully, looking for signs of serious neurological damage. Memory loss wasn't uncommon with head trauma, but something about the way he hesitated felt more deliberate than medical. Okay, Michael, I said. Let's focus on making sure you're stable first. Are you feeling nauseated? Dizzy? Any double vision? He closed his eyes briefly before responding. All of the above, actually. I helped him sit up slowly, checking his pupils with a penlight and watching for signs of increased brain pressure. That's completely normal with a concussion. You're going to need to take things very easy for the next several days. Several days? He looked around the clinic for the first time, taking in the examination tables designed for animals, the cabinets full of veterinary medicines, and the persistent smell of antiseptic mixed with dog shampoo. I can't stay here. I used the same firm tone I reserved for pet owners who tried to skip follow-up appointments. You can and you absolutely will. I didn't pull you out of a wrecked car just to watch you collapse from a brain hemorrhage. Besides, where exactly are you planning to go? The storm knocked out power to most of the county, and half the roads are completely impassable. As if the universe wanted to prove my point, thunder crashed overhead hard enough to rattle the windows and make both of us jump. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back against the wall. People will be looking for me. Family? Something like that. I wanted to push for more details, but exhaustion was written across every line of his face. Get some rest. We'll figure out how to contact whoever you need to reach once the storm passes and the phone lines are working again. The next morning brought brilliant sunshine and the sounds of chainsaws as the entire community began the massive job of cleaning up storm damage. Michael was already awake when I arrived with coffee and toast, sitting up against the wall and looking significantly more alert than he had the night before. How are you feeling? I asked, setting breakfast on my desk. He accepted the coffee like it was a gift from heaven. Much better. Clearer. I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything. I'm a doctor. Helping people is what I do. A slight smile crossed his face. A veterinarian. Same basic principles. Help those who can't help themselves. That smile completely transformed his face. Without the pallor and confusion of the previous night, I could see that he was actually quite handsome. But there was something else, something about the way he carried himself even while injured and wearing my old sweatshirt, that suggested he wasn't used to needing anyone's help. Tell me about Cedar Valley, he said, clearly trying to deflect attention away from himself. So I did. I told him about the farming families who'd lived here for 4 generations, about my mentor Dr. Williams who died suddenly 6 months ago and left me scrambling to keep the clinic running on my own. I told him about the horses and cattle that depended on me, about the rescue animals I fostered when I could afford to, about the tight-knit community where everyone looked out for each other even when times were tough. It sounds peaceful, he said thoughtfully. It is. Maybe too peaceful for someone like you. He tilted his head with curiosity. Someone like me? I gestured at his clothes, expensive even when torn and muddy. You're not from around here. Your speech patterns, your mannerisms, the way you carry yourself. You're used to a very different kind of world. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. The phone lines came back up that afternoon, but Michael seemed strangely reluctant to use them. Instead, he insisted on helping around the clinic despite my repeated protests about his concussion. I feel fine, he said, following me into the treatment room where I was preparing vaccines for a litter of golden retriever puppies. And I hate being completely useless. You're recovering from a serious head injury. That's not useless, it's medically necessary. But he was already washing his hands at the sink, studying the medical supplies with more familiarity than a random person should have. I've done some medical volunteer work before. Nothing exactly like this, but I understand basic procedures. He proved it by assisting with the puppy vaccinations with a level of competence that genuinely impressed me. His hands were gentle but confident, and he seemed to anticipate what I needed before I had to ask for it. As we finished cleaning up, I watched him work with growing curiosity. Some volunteer work? I spent time in a refugee camp a couple of years ago. Syria. You learn to help however you can when resources are limited. It was the first completely personal detail he'd shared that felt entirely honest, and it made me look at him with new respect. That must have been incredibly difficult. It puts a lot of things in perspective. Over the next 3 days, Michael became genuinely indispensable around the clinic. He helped with everything from restraining anxious animals during examinations to reorganizing my supply room with an efficiency that spoke of serious organizational experience. The local farmers who brought their animals in were initially suspicious of the stranger with the expensive clothes and unfamiliar accent, but Michael's genuine interest in their stories and his willingness to help with heavy lifting gradually won them over. Old Tom Bradley pulled me aside after Michael helped him load a sedated bull into his trailer without flinching. Your new assistant's got real good instincts with the large animals. Doesn't spook easy. He's not my assistant, I corrected automatically. Tom replied with the kind of knowing grin that small-town people perfect over decades. Well, that's a shame. You two work real well together. That evening, as we finished cleaning up after a particularly long day of appointments, I found myself watching Michael organize medical files with the same careful attention to detail he brought to everything else. There was something almost aristocratic about his features, a quiet confidence that suggested he was accustomed to being in charge of important things. You still haven't remembered your last name, I said. His hands went still on the paperwork. No. Still foggy about a lot of details. I crossed my arms and studied him carefully. Michael, I may be just a small-town veterinarian, but I'm not stupid. You remember more than you're telling me. He turned to face me directly, and for a moment I thought he might actually tell me the truth. Then he shook his head slowly. Sometimes forgetting things is easier than remembering them. Are you in some kind of trouble? Running away from something? I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're worried about. But you are running from something. He stepped closer, his expression growing serious. Maybe. Or maybe I just found something worth staying for. The way he looked at me when he said those words made my chest feel tight. I'd been telling myself that what I felt for him was just the natural satisfaction of saving someone's life, mixed with gratitude for his help around the clinic. But it was becoming something much more complicated than that. Sarah, he said quietly, stepping closer to where I stood. These past few days have been the most authentic I've felt in years. Authentic? Like I can just be myself without having to pretend to be someone else. Before I could ask him what he meant by that, his phone buzzed loudly. The phone I'd replaced for him that morning so he could supposedly call family members and let them know he was safe. He'd been claiming all day that the numbers he needed were stored in his damaged phone's memory, but he'd been avoiding making any calls. He looked at the screen and his face went completely pale. I have to take this. I reached out instinctively. Michael, wait. But he'd already stepped outside, and through the window I could see the tension in his shoulders as he answered. I couldn't hear the actual conversation, but his body language told me everything I needed to know. Whatever he'd been running from had finally found him. When he came back inside 5 minutes later, he looked like an entirely different person. The easy comfort we'd built over the past few days was gone, replaced by the guarded stranger I'd pulled from the wreckage. I have to leave, he said without any preamble. What? Why? It's complicated. I surprised myself with how forceful my voice sounded. Then make it simple. You've been hiding here for 3 days, and I've respected that. But if you're about to disappear without any explanation, I deserve to know who I actually saved. Michael ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I'd learned meant he was struggling with a difficult decision. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed me a news article that made my stomach drop. Technology executive Michael Harrison missing after storm, the headline read. Below it was a professional photograph of Michael in an expensive suit, standing next to someone I recognized from the news, Senator Patricia Reynolds, who'd been all over the media lately for her Technology Oversight Committee. I stared at the phone, then back at Michael. You're Michael Harrison. As in Harrison Technologies. Among other things, yes. I felt completely stunned. Among other things. You're worth what, hundreds of millions of dollars? Does that change anything between us? It changes everything. You've been lying to me for 3 days. He spoke with quiet intensity. I've never lied to you. I just didn't tell you the complete truth. Your company's logo is on half the equipment in this clinic. You're one of the wealthiest people in the country, and I've been feeding you toast and coffee and letting you sleep on my office couch. And those have been the best 3 days I've had in more years than I can count, he said with such complete sincerity that it stopped my anger dead in its tracks. I sank into my desk chair, trying to process what I'd just learned. Why were you driving alone through a storm like that? Where was your security team and your personal assistants and whatever other people billionaires travel with? Michael sat down across from me, suddenly looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. Because I was running away from all of that. From board meetings where I'm treated like a convenient figurehead. From security details that make me feel like a prisoner in my own life. From people who only see my net worth when they look at me. So you decided to take a drive during the worst storm in 20 years? I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd just come from a board meeting where my own directors tried to force me out of active company management. They said I was too idealistic, too focused on humanitarian projects that don't generate sufficient profit margins. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. My grandfather built that company to help people solve problems. Now they want to strip it down for quarterly earnings reports. And the memory loss story? Was genuine at first. The concussion really did scramble my thoughts for the first day or so. But by the second day, I remembered everything clearly. He looked at me with something that might have been desperation. I liked being just Michael. I liked having you look at me like I was a regular person instead of a walking financial statement. I stared at him, anger and understanding warring in my chest. That phone call. They found you. My security team. They've been searching systematically since the storm hit. My car was found washed up about 10 miles downstream, and they assumed the worst. He shrugged helplessly. They'll be here within the hour. To drag you back to your board meetings and profit margins. To drag me back to reality. The word hung between us like a challenge. I thought about the past 3 days, about how natural it had felt to have him working beside me, how perfectly he'd fit into my world like he belonged there. I thought about the way he'd gentled frightened animals and listened to farmers' stories with genuine interest and made me laugh during the longest days. What if you didn't go back? I heard myself ask. Sarah. I'm serious. What if you just stayed here? His voice was heavy with resignation. You don't understand what you're suggesting. It's not that simple. The company, the responsibilities, the legal obligations. The board of directors that wants to push you out anyway? That stopped him completely. It's my grandfather's legacy. Then fight for it. But fight for it on your own terms, not theirs. Before he could respond, headlights swept across the clinic windows. 2 black SUVs pulled into the gravel parking lot, and I could see multiple figures in dark suits getting out of the vehicles. Michael stood up slowly. I have to go with them. Do you really? Or do you just think you have to? He looked at me for what felt like an eternity, and I could see the same internal conflict in his eyes that I'd been feeling ever since he'd shown me that news article. Then he walked toward the door. Michael, I called after him. He turned back. When you figure out what you actually want instead of what everyone else expects from you, you know where to find me. The lead security agent was a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd seen serious combat. She introduced herself as Agent Martinez and was professionally polite but absolutely firm about needing to escort Michael back to the city immediately. "Sir, the board has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning," she said as two other agents flanked Michael protectively. "There are also significant legal matters that require your immediate personal attention." Michael's jaw tightened. "What kind of legal matters?" "Your disappearance has been officially classified as suspicious. There are allegations that you may have been the target of corporate espionage or kidnapping attempts. The FBI has opened a formal investigation." I watched Michael's face as the weight of his other life settled back onto his shoulders like a heavy coat. The man who'd helped me vaccinate puppies and reorganize supply closets was disappearing before my eyes, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Agent Martinez turned to me with professional courtesy. "Dr. Mitchell, we'll need a complete statement about how you found Mr. Harrison and everything that occurred during his time here." "Of course," I said, though my eyes never left Michael's face. As the agents prepared to escort him to their vehicles, Michael approached me one final time. "Thank you," he said with formal politeness, "for everything you did. Take care of yourself, Michael." He nodded once and walked toward the waiting SUV. I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, taking him back to a world that suddenly made my small clinic and simple life feel very far away indeed. The next morning brought a completely new reality to Cedar Valley. By noon, there were news vans crowding my parking lot and reporters shoving microphones in my face, all wanting details about my role in rescuing the missing tech billionaire. I gave one brief statement to the county sheriff and refused every single interview request, but the attention was overwhelming for someone accustomed to the quiet rhythms of rural veterinary practice. Most of the reporters packed up and left after the first day when it became clear I wasn't going to provide any sensational details, but the experience left me feeling unsettled, like my peaceful world had been invaded and might never feel quite the same again. I threw myself into work with almost desperate intensity, taking on extra emergency calls and staying late into the evening to catch up on paperwork. Anything to avoid thinking about Michael and the way he'd looked when he walked away from everything we'd built together. 1 week passed. Then 2. Then 3. I told myself I was being completely ridiculous. Michael Harrison was a billionaire with responsibilities and obligations I couldn't begin to understand. Whatever connection we'd felt during those 3 days belonged to a different reality than the one he'd returned to. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said reality like it was a prison sentence he'd been handed by someone else. The call that changed everything came on a Thursday evening as I was locking up the clinic after a particularly long day. My answering service had taken a message from someone claiming to be Michael Harrison's personal assistant, requesting an urgent veterinary consultation. Consultation regarding what? I asked when I called the number back. A crisp professional voice explained, "Mr. Harrison has recently acquired a rural property in your area that includes several horses. He's seeking a local veterinarian to provide ongoing care and establish a regular treatment schedule." My heart rate spiked despite my attempts to stay completely professional. "What kind of property?" "A working ranch. Approximately 20 minutes from Cedar Valley. Mr. Harrison will be in residence starting this weekend and would like to meet with you to discuss the animal's specific needs." I almost said no. Almost told her to find another veterinarian. But curiosity won out over self-preservation every single time. "Fine. Saturday morning. I'll need the exact address." The address she provided was for the old Riverside Ranch, a beautiful piece of property that had been on the market for over a year. As I drove up the winding gravel road Saturday morning, I could understand why Michael had chosen it. Rolling hills covered in green pastures, a restored farmhouse that looked like something from a magazine, and enough space for someone to disappear completely from the pressures of running a billion-dollar corporation. Michael was waiting by the main barn, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like they'd actually been worn for real work instead of a photo shoot. He looked more like the man I'd pulled from the wreckage than the billionaire who'd been escorted away by federal agents. "You bought a ranch," I said as I got out of my truck. "I bought a ranch," he confirmed. "Just like that. Just like that." He gestured toward the pasture where 6 beautiful horses grazed peacefully in the morning sunshine. "They need a veterinarian. I heard you're the best in the area." "I'm the only one in the area. Even better. We walked toward the horses together, and I could feel him watching me with the same careful attention he'd paid to everything during those 3 days at the clinic. Michael, what are you actually doing here? You told me to fight for what I wanted on my own terms, he said. So that's exactly what I did. And? I restructured the entire company from the ground up. Bought out the 3 board members who were causing problems, replaced the others with people who actually believe in my grandfather's original vision, and installed new leadership that's focused exclusively on humanitarian applications and sustainable development projects. That must have cost a fortune. Several fortunes, actually. But it turns out I had several to spare. I stopped walking and turned to face him directly. And then you bought a ranch in the middle of nowhere. And then I bought a ranch where I can oversee the company's new direction while actually having a life that belongs to me. He stepped closer. If you'll help me figure out what that life should look like. Michael. I know it sounds completely insane. I know you barely know the real me, and what you do know includes the fact that I wasn't entirely honest with you for 3 days. But those 3 days showed me exactly what I want. Not the board meetings or the corporate politics or the careful distance everyone maintains because of what I'm worth. He reached for my hands. I want someone who pulls me out of rivers and puts me to work with animals. I want someone who sees me as just Michael. But you're not just Michael. You're Michael Harrison, with a billion-dollar company and responsibilities and a whole world that I don't understand. Then let me show you that world. Let me prove that the man you saved is the same person standing here asking you to take a chance. Before I could respond, one of the horses whinnied loudly from the pasture. We both turned to see a mare clearly in distress, pacing in tight circles and showing obvious signs of severe colic. Emergency, I said, immediately switching into professional mode. For the next 90 minutes, Michael assisted as I treated the horse, following my instructions with the same calm competence he demonstrated at the clinic. We worked together with seamless efficiency, and by the time the mare was stable and comfortable, I'd remembered exactly why those 3 days had felt so perfectly right. That was impressive work, I said as we cleaned up. I had an excellent teacher. Michael, about what you said earlier. But before I could finish the thought, a black sedan came racing up the drive, kicking up a cloud of dust. 2 men in expensive suits jumped out, looking harried and urgent. The first one called out breathlessly, "Mr. Harrison, we've been trying to reach you for hours. There's been a major development with the Brennan situation." I saw Michael's jaw tighten visibly. "What kind of development, Charles?" "Victor Brennan has filed a federal injunction to stop the company restructuring. He's claiming you're mentally unfit to make such drastic decisions based on your recent erratic and unstable behavior." Erratic behavior? The disappearance during the storm, the sudden corporate changes, and now. Charles glanced at me and the ranch around us with obvious disapproval. This. Michael's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Victor Brennan was one of the board members actively trying to strip my company for parts and profit. Of course he's fighting back. Sir, he has backing from several major institutional investors. If he can successfully prove you're not mentally competent to run Harrison Technologies. Michael finished grimly, he can force a hostile takeover. The second man stepped forward urgently. "Mr. Harrison, we need you back in the city immediately. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for Monday morning, and we have an enormous amount of preparation work to do." I watched Michael's face as the full weight of his responsibilities crashed back down on him like a landslide. This wasn't just about corporate politics anymore. This was about his family's legacy, about the humanitarian work he'd talked about with such genuine passion. "Go," I said quietly. "Sarah. Go fight for your company. Fight for everything your grandfather built and everything you believe in." I touched his arm gently. "The horses will still be here when you get back. Will you be here?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd turned his entire life upside down for 3 days spent with a small-town veterinarian. "That depends on whether you win." The legal battle that followed lasted exactly 3 weeks and played out across every business news channel in the country. I followed the coverage obsessively, watching from my quiet clinic as Michael fought to maintain control of his own company against people who saw him as nothing more than an obstacle to profit. The headlines were sensational and brutal. Tech moguls' mental health under federal scrutiny, Harrison Technologies in complete corporate chaos, billionaire's ranch purchase raises serious competency questions. Throughout it all, I continued taking care of the horses at Riverside Ranch. Michael had made arrangements for me to have complete access to the property, and I found myself spending more and more time there. It was peaceful in a way that reminded me of those 3 days when he'd been just Michael, helping around my clinic and making me feel like the most important person in his world. The breakthrough in the case came when dozens of former Harrison Technologies employees came forward to testify about Victor Brennan's systematic attempts to redirect company resources away from humanitarian projects toward more profitable but morally questionable ventures. Medical volunteers from the Syrian refugee camp where Michael had worked submitted detailed statements about his mental stability, his commitment to helping others, and his clear thinking under extreme pressure. The documentation painted a picture of someone who was not only completely competent but actively working to make the world better. In the end, the federal judge ruled that there was absolutely no credible evidence of mental incompetence, and that Michael's business decisions, while unconventional by corporate standards, were completely within his rights as majority shareholder. Brennan's injunction was dismissed with prejudice, and Harrison Technologies remained firmly under Michael's control. I was in the ranch's main barn 3 days later, checking on the mare who'd had colic, when I heard a car coming up the gravel drive. Through the open barn doors, I saw Michael's rental car pulling up to the farmhouse. He looked exhausted but genuinely relieved as he walked toward me. "How are they doing?" he asked, nodding toward the horses. "They're fine. How are you doing?" "Victorious. Tired. Ready to start building something completely new." He stopped a few feet away from me. "I kept my promise." "Which promise was that?" "I fought for what I wanted on my own terms." He stepped closer. "The company is secure, the humanitarian projects are fully funded, and Victor Brennan is permanently out of my life. And I realized that none of it matters at all if I don't have someone to share it with." He reached for my hands. "Sarah, I love you. I fell in love with you when you were taking care of me in your clinic, and I fell deeper in love with you every single day since then. I know my world is complicated, and I know it's different from yours, but..." I kissed him. Right there in the barn, with the horses as our only witnesses, I kissed the man who'd bought an entire ranch just to have a reason to stay near me. When we finally broke apart, he was smiling like sunrise. "Does that mean yes?" "That means we'll figure it out together," I said. "All of it." 8 months later, I split my time between my expanded clinic in Cedar Valley and the ranch where Michael worked remotely, overseeing Harrison Technologies' humanitarian initiatives from a home office that overlooked the pastures. We'd gotten married on the ranch in a small ceremony with local friends, some of Michael's colleagues who'd supported him during the legal battle, and every single animal we'd rescued together. Michael had proven to be a natural with large animals, and I often caught him having serious conversations with the horses about corporate strategy and sustainable development. They seemed to be excellent listeners. The clinic was thriving. Michael's connections had brought in several major accounts, but more importantly, his business expertise had helped me expand services to 3 neighboring counties. We'd built a state-of-the-art facility that served both domestic animals and wildlife rehabilitation. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I reflected on what I'd learned. Sometimes the most important rescues are the ones where you save each other. Michael had saved me from a failing business and a lonely life, while I'd saved him from a world that saw him as nothing more than a bank account. The best part wasn't the money or the success or even the ranch. The best part was building something real with someone who understood that love means supporting each other's dreams, even when those dreams require bridging completely different worlds. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael about dinner plans. As I gathered my things and headed home to our ranch, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices and excitement about what came next. Sometimes saving one stranger's life is really about saving your own. So we've reached the end of today's story. Did you see the billionaire reveal coming, or were you surprised by Michael's true identity? I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Sarah made the right choice taking a chance on love with someone from such a different world? Drop your opinions in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. If this rescue romance kept you hooked, smash that like button. And if you're new here, hit subscribe for more stories where love conquers all obstacles. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.